Before we begin today's presentation, here is a brief and unrelated word. Quite apart from today's subject, there is also a separate book series titled Psyop Christianity, written by Ron Allen Curtis Ratzlaff, under the pen name The Awakened Hybrid. It is its own, entirely different investigation. That work stands on its own. Across 7 volumes, it examines historical anomalies in the origins of Christianity and makes the evidence-driven case that the faith was shaped deliberately by the Roman Empire. If that separate subject interests you, the complete series is available now on Amazon. Simply search Psyop Christianity or scan the code on screen. Now, let us begin. From Ararat to Avalon, a chronological reconstruction of Syro-Anatolian presence in prehistoric and ancient Britain through multi-proxy analysis abstract. This investigation undertakes a systematic, chronologically structured examination of evidence for sustained connectivity between the Upper Euphrates cultural complex, encompassing Hurrian, Urartian, and Syro-Phoenician populations, and the British Isles from the early Bronze Age through the early medieval period. Rather than treating the appearance of Near Eastern material culture, genetic signatures, and institutional forms in Britain as anomalous or coincidental, this study proposes that these phenomena represent the operation of long-term maritime and overland exchange networks centered on the extraction and distribution of strategic mineral resources, particularly tin from Cornwall and copper from the Armenian highlands. The analysis integrates archaeogenetic data from published ancient DNA studies, linguistic evidence from multiple language families, numismatic sequences from both regions, and epigraphic corpora, including cuneiform administrative records, Phoenician inscriptions, and early Celtic texts. The chronological framework reveals a pattern of intensifying contact punctuated by periods of apparent disruption that correlate with known geopolitical transformations in the intervening regions. Particular attention is devoted to anomalies in the conventional timeline, including the appearance of Eastern Mediterranean genetic markers in Britain predating the Roman conquest, the presence of Near Eastern iconographic elements in late Bronze Age British metalwork, and the persistence of institutional forms spanning the Hurro-Urartian and Celtic worlds that cannot be explained through conventional diffusionist models. Part 1. The Bronze Age Foundation, circa 3000 to 1200 BCE. Section 1.1. The emergence of the Hurro-Urartian world, the linguistic prehistory of the Armenian highlands and the Upper Euphrates basin provides the essential foundation for understanding subsequent population movements. The Hurro-Urartian language family, comprising Hurrian and its later descendant Urartian, represents a linguistic isolate with no demonstrated genetic relationship to the Semitic, Indo-European, or Sumerian language families that surrounded it. The deep time depth of this language family in the region is indicated by the presence of Hurrian personal names and toponyms in Akkadian and Sumerian texts, dating to the 3rd millennium BCE, suggesting that Hurrian-speaking populations were already established in the Upper Euphrates region during the early Bronze Age. The archaeological correlates of early Hurrian presence have been identified at sites including Tel Mozan, ancient Urkesh, Tel Brak, and Tel Chuera in the Khabur River basin of northeastern Syria. Excavations at Tel Mozan have revealed a major urban center with monumental architecture, sophisticated glyptic art, and evidence of long-distance trade connections extending to Anatolia, the Iranian plateau, and the Levant. The distinctive ceramic assemblages of the Khabur ware tradition, characterized by painted geometric designs on wheel-made vessels, provide a material culture marker for Hurrian presence that can be traced across northern Mesopotamia during the early 2nd millennium BCE. The religious and mythological traditions of the Hurrians, preserved primarily through Hittite translations discovered at the capital of Hattusa, reveal a complex pantheon with a distinctive theological structure. The Hurrian pantheon was headed by the divine pair Kumabi and Anu, whose mythological cycle, the Song of Kumabi, narrates a succession of divine kingship involving castration, swallowing, and eventual usurpation. This mythological complex shows clear structural parallels with the Greek theogony of Hesiod, specifically the succession myth involving Ouranos, Kronos, and Zeus, indicating transmission of Hurrian mythological material to the Aegean world during the late Bronze Age. Chronological Note 1. The directionality and mechanism of this mythological transmission remain contested. The conventional view posits that Hurrian myths were transmitted to Greece through Anatolian intermediaries during the late Bronze Age, with the Hittites serving as the primary vector. However, the appearance of specific mythological motifs, particularly the castration of the sky god and the swallowing of a stone in both the Hurrian Kumabi cycle and the Greek theogony, suggests a more direct transmission pathway. The presence of these motifs in the mythology of the Celts, particularly in the Irish mythological cycle involving the succession of divine kings at Tara, raises the possibility of a shared mythological substrate extending across the entire Indo-European and Near Eastern world, or, alternatively, of subsequent transmission through maritime exchange networks during the Iron Age. Section 1.2. The Mitanni Kingdom and Indo-Aryan Contact. The emergence of the Mitanni Kingdom during the 16th century BCE represents a critical juncture in the interaction between Hurrian-speaking populations, Indo-Iranian-speaking groups. The Mitanni state, centered on the Khabur River basin and extending its influence across northern Syria and southeastern Anatolia, was governed by a ruling class that bore explicitly Indo-Aryan names and invoked Indo-Aryan deities in diplomatic contexts. The treaty between the Mitanni king Shatiwaza and the Hittite king Suppiluliuma, the first preserved in the Hittite royal archives at Hattusa, invokes the deities Mitra, Varuna, Indra, and the Nasatyas as divine witnesses, a pantheon that corresponds precisely to the major deities of the Rig Vedic tradition. The linguistic evidence for Indo-Aryan presence in the Mitanni kingdom extends beyond divine names. The Kikuli text, a Hittite treatise on horse training discovered at Hattusa, employs technical vocabulary that is demonstrably Indo-Aryan in origin. The numerals used for counting laps in horse training Aika: 1. Tera, 3. Panza, 5. Sata, 7. Nawa, 9, correspond to Sanskrit Eka, tree, Panka, Sabda, and Nava, with the characteristic Indo-Aryan sound change of Indo-Iranian S to H, as in Sapta, rather than the Iranian Hapta, confirming the specifically Indo-Aryan affiliation of this vocabulary. The archaeological correlates of Indo-Aryan presence in the Mitanni realm remain more elusive. The material culture of the Mitanni period shows strong continuity with preceding Hurrian traditions, with no clear archaeological horizon that can be attributed to an incoming Indo-Aryan elite. This pattern of linguistic and onomastic evidence for elite dominance without corresponding material culture change parallels the broader phenomenon of Indo-European elite dominance documented across Eurasia during the 2nd millennium BCE. The genetic evidence for this period, discussed in subsequent sections, provides additional support for a model of elite migration rather than mass population replacement. The connection between the Mitanni Indo-Aryans and the broader Indo-Iranian world has been the subject of extensive scholarly debate. The traditional view, articulated by Parpola, Witzel, and others, posits that the Mitanni Indo-Aryans represent an early offshoot of the Indo-Aryan branch that separated from the main body of Indo-Aryan speakers before their entry into the Indian subcontinent. This model places the Mitanni Indo-Aryans within the context of the Bactria-Margiana archaeological complex and its interactions with the Andronovo steppe cultures, with the Mitanni offshoot moving westward across the Iranian plateau and into northern Mesopotamia during the early 2nd millennium BCE. Chronological Note 2. The dating of the Rig Veda and its relationship to the Mitanni Indo-Aryans presents significant chronological challenges. The conventional scholarly dating of the Rig Veda to approximately 1500 to 1200 BCE places its composition after the Mitanni period, raising questions about the relationship between the two Indo-Aryan traditions. However, the presence of archaic linguistic features in the Mitanni Indo-Aryan material features that are absent from the Rig Veda suggests that the Mitanni tradition preserves an earlier stage of Indo-Aryan linguistic development. This observation has led some scholars to propose that the Mitanni Indo-Aryans represent a pre-Rig Vedic stage of Indo-Aryan, preserving linguistic and religious features that were subsequently transformed in the Indian subcontinent. The implications of this chronological relationship for understanding the Rig Vedic mention of the Anu tribe require careful consideration. Section 1.3. The Anu question. Vedic ethnonym and Mesopotamian theonym. The appearance of Anu in both the Rig Veda and the Horo-Mesopotamian pantheon constitutes one of the most intriguing points of contact between these two cultural spheres. In the Rig Veda, the Anus appear as one of the tribal groupings involved in the Battle of the Ten Kings, a conflict described in hymns 7.18, 7.33, and 7.83 of the Rig Veda. The Anus are consistently mentioned alongside the Druhus as enemies of the Bharata Confederation led by King Sudas, and the hymns describe their defeat and dispersal following the battle on the banks of the Parushni River, modern Ravi. The traditional interpretation of the Battle of the Ten Kings, as developed by scholars including Macdonnell, Keith, and Witzel, places this conflict in the Punjab region during the period of Indo-Aryan expansion into the Indian subcontinent. The Anus are identified as one of the Indo-Aryan tribes that opposed the Bharata Confederation, with their subsequent dispersal interpreted as part of the broader pattern of tribal movements and consolidations that characterized the early Vedic period. The possibility that the Anus might be connected to the Mesopotamian sky god Anu has generally been dismissed as a coincidental homophony without historical significance. However, several considerations suggest that this dismissal may be premature. The Mesopotamian deity Anu, Akkadian Anu, Sumerian An, occupies the apex of the Mesopotamian pantheon as the sky god and father of the gods, a position he inherited from earlier Sumerian tradition. In the Hurrian pantheon, Anu appears as the primordial sky god who is overthrown by Kumarbi, establishing the divine succession that structures Hurrian mythology. The presence of Anu in both the Hurrian and Mesopotamian pantheons reflects the deep integration of Hurrian and Mesopotamian religious traditions during the second millennium BCE. The possibility that the Vedic Anus and the Mesopotamian Anu share a common origin requires examination of the broader pattern of Mesopotamian and Syro-Anatolian elements in Vedic tradition. The Vedic flood narrative involving Manu, the division of the cosmos into three realms, and specific mythological motifs, including the churning of the ocean, all show evidence of contact with Mesopotamian mythological tradition. The mechanism of this transmission remains debated, with proposals ranging from direct contact during the Indus Valley period to indirect transmission through Iranian intermediaries. The Mitanni kingdom, with its Indo-Aryan elite ruling over a Hurrian population and maintaining diplomatic relations across the Near East, provides a plausible vector for the transmission of Mesopotamian and Hurrian religious concepts to the Indo-Aryan world. Chronological Note 3. The chronological relationship between the Vedic Anus and the Mesopotamian Anu presents a complex problem. The Mesopotamian deity Anu is attested from the earliest Sumerian texts of the 3rd millennium BCE, predating the composition of the Rig Veda by at least a millennium. If the Vedic Anus derive their name from the Mesopotamian deity, this would require a mechanism of transmission operating over a very long time period. Alternatively, if the Vedic Anus and the Mesopotamian Anu share a common origin in a deeper prehistoric stratum, this would imply connections between the Indo-Iranian and Near Eastern worlds extending back to the 4th or 3rd millennium BCE. The evidence from the Bactria-Margiana archaeological complex, which shows clear connections with both the Iranian plateau and the Indus Valley, provides a potential archaeological context for such early contacts. Section 1.4. The BMAC and the Indo-Iranian interface, the Bactria Margiana archaeological complex, centered on the oasis settlements of the Murghab and Amu Darya river systems in modern Turkmenistan and northern Afghanistan, represents one of the most significant but understudied civilizations of the Bronze Age. Flourishing from approximately 2300 to 1700 BCE, the BMAC developed a sophisticated urban civilization with monumental architecture, advanced metallurgy, and extensive trade networks extending to the Indus Valley, the Iranian Plateau, and the steppes of Central Asia. The relationship between the BMAC and the Indo-Iranian speaking populations of the Andronovo steppe cultures has been the subject of extensive scholarly debate. The traditional model, articulated by Mallory and others, posits that Indo-Iranian speaking steppe pastoralists migrated southward into the BMAC region during the late 3rd and early 2nd millennia BCE, adopting elements of BMAC material culture and religious ideology while maintaining their Indo-Iranian language. This model of elite dominance and cultural fusion provides a framework for understanding the subsequent emergence of the Indo-Aryan and Iranian branches of the Indo-Iranian family. The BMAC religious and ideological complex shows clear connections with both the Near Eastern and Indo-Iranian worlds. The iconography of BMAC seals and metalwork includes motifs, winged felines, eagle-headed deities, and figures seated in positions of authority that show parallels with both Mesopotamian and later Iranian artistic traditions. The presence of ritual vessels and architectural features associated with fire worship and the preparation of sacred beverages, soma, haoma, suggest that key elements of Indo-Iranian religious practice were already present in the BMAC region during the late 3rd millennium BCE. The genetic evidence for population movements in this region has been significantly clarified by recent ancient DNA studies. Narasimhan et al. 2019 demonstrated that the populations of the BMAC region during the Middle and Late Bronze Age carried a genetic profile distinct from both the preceding Neolithic populations of the Iranian plateau and the steppe populations of the Andronovo horizon. The BMAC populations showed high proportions of ancestry derived from Iranian Neolithic populations with limited steppe ancestry, suggesting that the Indo-Iranian linguistic presence in the region resulted from elite migration rather than mass population replacement. Subsequent admixture between BMAC-derived populations and steppe pastoralists produced the genetic profile that characterizes later Indo-Iranian speaking populations of South and Central Asia. Section 1.5. The tin trade and early maritime networks. The extraction and distribution of tin during the Bronze Age represents one of the most critical but poorly understood dimensions of prehistoric economic organization. Bronze, the defining technology of the Bronze Age, requires the alloying of copper with tin in proportions of approximately 90% to 10%. While copper deposits are relatively widespread, tin deposits are geographically restricted, with major sources located in Cornwall, the Erzgebirge Mountains of Central Europe, the Taurus Mountains of Anatolia, and the region of modern Afghanistan and Tajikistan. The isotopic analysis of tin ingots and bronze artifacts has revolutionized our understanding of Bronze Age trade networks. The pioneering work of Pernicka and others has demonstrated that tin from specific geological sources carries a distinctive isotopic signature that can be traced through the metallurgical chain to finished bronze artifacts. The analysis of tin ingots from the Uluburun shipwreck, a late Bronze Age vessel that sank off the coast of Anatolia circa 1300 BCE, revealed that a significant proportion of the tin cargo originated from sources in Central Asia, with additional contributions from Anatolian sources. The presence of Cornish tin in Mediterranean contexts during the late Bronze Age has been suggested by some analyses, though the evidence remains debated. The maritime dimension of the Bronze Age tin trade has been illuminated by the discovery of shipwrecks and coastal trading settlements across the Mediterranean and Atlantic worlds. The Uluburun shipwreck, with its cargo of copper and tin ingots, glass, ivory, ebony, and luxury goods from across the eastern Mediterranean, demonstrates the sophistication and geographic range of late Bronze Age maritime trade. The presence of Baltic amber and Central European metalwork in Mediterranean contexts, and conversely of Mediterranean goods in Northern European contexts, indicates that these trade networks extended far beyond the Mediterranean basin. The specific question of direct contact between the Eastern Mediterranean and the British Isles during the Bronze Age remains controversial. The conventional view, articulated by Cunliffe and others, posits that Mediterranean goods reached Britain through a series of indirect exchanges along the Atlantic facade, with no direct contact between Mediterranean seafarers and British populations. However, the growing evidence for the capabilities of Bronze Age seafaring, including the reconstruction of vessels capable of open water navigation and the discovery of Mediterranean material culture in increasingly northern contexts, has led some scholars to propose that direct contact may have occurred during the late Bronze Age. Chronological. Note 4. The chronological relationship between the Bronze Age tin trade and the emergence of Syro-Phoenician maritime networks presents a significant problem. The major phase of Phoenician maritime expansion occurred during the early 1st millennium BCE, after the collapse of the late Bronze Age palace economies and the disruption of earlier trade networks. However, the evidence for Mycenaean and Minoan presence in the Western Mediterranean during the late Bronze Age, including the discovery of Mycenaean pottery in Iberia and Italy, suggests that Eastern Mediterranean seafarers were already operating in Atlantic waters before the Phoenician expansion. The possibility that these earlier networks established patterns of contact that were subsequently reactivated by Phoenician and Syro-Phoenician traders requires further investigation. Stay tuned for Part 2. This presentation was produced by Creatic Media, a veteran-owned digital studio. We build production-grade progressive web apps and custom software. Our own trivia platform, Muse Ion Trivia, shows exactly what we can deliver for your business. We also offer fully built business websites and ready-to-launch templates, from done-for-you sites to affordable starter designs. We also create marketing commercials using localized on-premise AI, giving small businesses broadcast quality ads for a fraction of the cost of a full marketing team. And because everything runs on our own hardware, your project never touches a remote data center. Your data stays private. Visit creaticmedia.com to start your project today. That concludes part 1. Stay tuned for part 2, where our investigation continues. We will see you there.